Well,
Kicking around, trying to find Harlock. I
hello
noticed that
everyone.
some people called it Herlock.
So that's the whole thing. Hello, world. So the reason for that is that there was like a licensing dispute when folks were releasing one of the Harlock things. So they basically said, "Hey, if we just call it Herlock, are we cool?" And they're like, "We're cool." So and it was sort of it was kind of a gentleman's agreement of saying, "Look, like we would have to come after you copyright wise," and they're like,
Right.
so this let everyone be happy,
Yeah, 'cause all the places I found it said Herlock, it was the same thing. And I'm translation issue? How hard is it to translate Harlock?
Because we were talking about Lupin earlier, and same thing happened with Lupin. There's a Lupin the Third release as an anime over here for the same reason that there was a licensing thing. So they called it, this is Lupin the Third, and it just kind of skirts around that so nobody would get upset.
It's RuPaul the Third.
Yeah. I want to see that anime.
What? Master Drag Thief.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of which, I did finish Toshio Okada's analysis of Cagliostro, and oh my gosh, he revealed all sorts of details and information and background to that movie that gives it so much context, so many layers around like the upper Cagliostro family versus the lower Cagliostro family, and what the Count was trying to do with Clarice and manipulation and all sorts of things going on. It's fascinating.
Nice.
So way beyond what we could have picked up from watching.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Well, and this is the guy
because I hate when people like point out stuff that like should have been obvious, and then you're just kind of like, oh.
Well, no, because this is the guy who comes on screen, and behind him he has a scale model of the Castle of Cagliostro.
Ooh.
He has the gyrocopter model. Yeah, and then he pulls out like Lupin's card. Like it's just you're that guy.
Oh, wow. Dang.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and I think at some point he says, "I'll have to show you."
I don't feel so bad.
Yeah, at some point he says, "This is one of several scale models of the Castle Cagliostro I own." It's like, wow.
My basement is filled with castles.
He does a video on Castle in the Sky, the Ghibli film, and I just saw like a thumbnail of it, and he also has like a yay big replica of the ship that they fly in, like huge replica, and so he goes in and points out all the he's a fan, otaku of the old school,
Yeah.
Wow.
Now the question is it scratch built?
That's a question.
Because some of those, some model kits, they're big, but they're not like super, super giant big.
Mm-hmm. I would not put it past them. So we are here to talk about Captain Harlock, Arcadia of my youth. So I want to ask you guys, first off, what has been your exposure to Captain Harlock up to this point? Because it's sort of an origin story, so that's fairly significant.
I've seen bits and pieces of the series.
Okay.
And again, this is a kind of an Otakon thing, where sometimes I would, duck into the one to the one video room that would have Captain Harlock. Yeah, I remember Captain Harlock. Oh, I'll go in here and watch it. What was it? The Train 999?
Galaxy Express 39s. Yep.
Yeah, Galaxy Express. It's been years since I've seen that, but I've seen that a couple times. But I've noticed, and I think I've seen Arcadia of my youth. Some clips. Okay. I don't think I've seen the whole thing. I thought I had, but when I watched it, I was just like, no, I didn't see this. This wonderfully uplifting.
Oh, it's a fun ride.
Pastel colored.
It's basically K-On! Pretty much, yeah.
I would never think to ever describe Captain Harlock, this movie, as basically K-On. Although it did have some beautiful incidental music.
It does.
I love the classical pieces that they threw in with it, but
absolutely.
not K-On.
No. So John, what's been your exposure?
I think it was after we had a discussion at one of the Star Cities about Japanese military equipment and the ethos behind everybody's on the defense and they don't really attack too much, or they're something is going on that forces their hand. It's not they're not the ones that are aggressors. And so having watched Yamato before, I went back and I started the TV series. I made it 7 episodes in, and then I put it on hold, and I no idea when I put it on hold. It had to have been several years ago. So I started to be familiar with it. I then watched a documentary on Yamato that had mentioned that they initially planned for Harlock to be on the Yamato crew.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember
it was like
that.
he was...
I vaguely remember that.
It was like he was supposed to be one of like the upper sort of crewmen, not the captain of the Yamato, but like the second in command kind of guy.
Yeah.
And I was just like, holy, really? Which makes total sense when you watch any of the Yamato, where they typically show the ship flying away from you with the engines going, and it arcs to the right or it arcs to the left, and everything in Harlock arcs to the right or arcs to the left. And it's like your character models for both series are almost indistinguishable. I mean, the long willowy women, the kind of blocky guys, and it's like, okay, it's perfectly in its time period. So I've seen those bits. Over the years before that, I had seen snippets.
Okay.
Like people's kind of bringing up Harlock and showing the Arcadia and talking about, its connection to Yamato. So same kind of thing like Steve, where it's like pieces, parts here and there.
Gotcha. I've seen, I went back and I watched, I think the first Harlock thing I saw was probably The Ring of the Nibelung, which is an OVA that adapts, it is basically a mashup of Captain Harlock and Wagner's Ring Cycle.
Interesting.
And I was very interested. So I checked that out, and it's fun.
Was it good? It's fun, but was it good?
It was good, but it's very different. Because it's literally space opera.
I was just going to say, speaking as someone who has actually worked in actual opera, The Rings is just like this mammoth thing that goes on. Like, you can't do it in one night. It's done in 3 different performances. And when you sit, I'm like going, an 9-hour anime? What?
Well, and it's actually one of the problems, but that's a whole nother thing. But I enjoyed it very much. It was just it was actually turned out to be a good introduction to sort of the Leiji Matsumoto verse, which we'll get to in a second, because it's not like very closely tied in plot-wise to other stories. Characters show up, but it's not like, oh, we're referencing this thing that happened back in Harlock 78 or, Galaxy Express, what have you. Then I went back and I did watch the original Harlock TV series. I've seen Galaxy Express, chunks of it. The TV series, which is like 120 episodes or something, so, not all of them.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yep. And so the other thing I want to point out is this is part of the Matsumoto verse. Leiji Matsumoto does he's a mangaka. He's done tons of manga, and he's famous for the fact that all of his stuff kind of loosely connects within all this space opera stuff. So he reuses characters, reuses settings, and references things in past manga, but there's no like tight chronology. Right, it's more, I'm going to reuse these characters. I'm going to tell another story in there. I might include elements. I might completely rewrite history. It's whatever serves the story. It's kind of weird. Arcadia, My Youth, in contrast, is very much an origin story for Harlock and all the characters. You get to see a lot of folks sort of come together. And oddly, it's also an origin story for the characters in the movie, because you get flashbacks and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, this came out. So Arcadia of My Youth came out in '82, if I have my numbers right. So the Harlock TV series had been out for a couple of years. It was quite popular, and there was obviously a draw for that, for a big budget movie. And I love how the big Harlock movie opens with a fighter plane flying through
a biplane.
A biplane. Yes.
Like
Papua New Guinea. Was it Papua New Guinea?
I thought that was an odd kind of place choice for
Yeah.
that. It's like, wow,
I mean,
so are you referencing the Kokoda Trail and like the furthest extent of the Japanese Empire in World War II was Papua New Guinea? He's talking about trying to get to Rabaul, which was a large naval air station in New Guinea. Like,
well, actually, what I took from it was that the family is German. The Harlock family is German, and the Germans did have colonies in the Pacific during World War One. And so, but I wasn't, and they did have like a naval fleet out there, not much of one, but they had a fleet out there, and their holdings was very, very small. And so I was like, wow, they are referencing a really obscure German part of history in this. And, I was like, and because, we were talking about, how there's that connection between Harlock and Toshiro, how they make that friendship. And I was like, okay, this must be the part that they're talking about. And it isn't.
No.
And, it's the great grandfather, he goes through that whole thing, like almost poem, like Arcadia of My Youth, wanting to surpass the mountain and the laughing witch and all that stuff. And I thought in and of itself, just if you cut that right out of the movie, and of it in and of itself is actually a pretty compelling little story.
Yeah.
Actually.
It's
man versus mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, we were talking earlier about, old school otaku. I think this was very much setting up the fact that, this is not going to be a spaceships and laser guns story. This is going to be about history. Pay attention.
Yeah.
Which it very much does.
Well, and the thing that kind of made me laugh is my ex's grandfather flew the hump in the China-Burma-India theater. So he flew back and forth across the Himalayas into China and back and forth to India.
Okay.
And
Jesus.
he had passed the few months after we started dating. So she told me some of his stories, and there they are in like a C-36 Waco, I think. So it's not the C-47, but they're, is it a Waco? I don't remember. Dakota? But they were having to dodge mountains because they couldn't get a fully loaded plane up over the mountains. So they had to fly through certain passes to work their way into Western China.
Right, yeah.
And I'm looking at this and thinking, they had to go the way they had to go because there was no other way to go. This dude, the Stanley Mountain Range, your option, you fly along the coast. That's how you get around the Stanley Mountain Range. You fly around the coast. So here we've got Phantom Harlock deciding that his machismo moment is to conquer the mountain with his plane. Where it's like, listen, dum dum, just go round it. You got a full tank of fuel. You've told us this much. Go round.
Yeah.
But the witch was mocking him.
That's an excuse.
If I hadn't turned my head and. Gonna dump all my fuel precious in just 10 minutes to accomplish. I mean, it was just like this one big poem, and at the end of it, I expected to see a bunch of men sitting around with brandy sniffers and going, "Yeah, it's great story, quite a good story."
Yeah, and Hemingway sitting there. Oh, you're so much more manly than me.
Luxury. And I think that also gets though very much to the theme of the film, because I think he is being kind of foolhardy, and he is just kind of pushing forward despite common sense, which is very much what everyone else does in this movie.
Yeah.
Because this is not a comedy. Gosh.
Was it?
Yeah.
It was a laugh riot, I thought.
Well, I will say this much: there were moments in this where, in the average later style film, so this is 1982. This is 1982 concepts and moment in time. Later on, you would have heroic charge in Devil May Care. You know, sort of like Harlock's grandfather, or I guess it's 1,000 years later, so his great grandfather. He's charging against the Stanley Witch like a lunatic. And yet, when things are going really, really bad and the threats are down, if you don't come back, this is going to happen. What does Harlock do? He just stands there and coldly stares into space, because the logical, rational, and survivable thing to do is to not go. And it's like, oh, I applauded that moment. I'm like, yes, thank you.
Yep.
I'm not just going to crash dive the ship into the place and be like, we got to save that person and kill everybody.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is one of the interesting things about the movie is, it opens, well, after that whole sequence, with Harlock endangering the lives of a bunch of civilians by, landing his ship such that it can't be salvaged or can't be really used. But this is very much a movie about him growing up, about him making more mature decisions over the course of life and realizing, I need to think ahead. I need to look at the bigger picture, But at the same time...
What I was going to say is I thought that, as that sequence was going where he's crashing the ship, doing the 1,000-yard stare of like, screw it all, I'm going to kill everybody just to make a point. There were moments, or I think 4 moments, where his hand goes towards his sidearm.
Yep.
And, and I'm like going, is he... Now, obviously it's not going to happen because it's the beginning of the movie, but is he thinking about killing himself?
Yeah.
Is he thinking about killing himself? And then when they come onto the bridge, is he thinking about killing them?
Yeah.
What is it? Where is he going with all this?
And when Zal comes in, that's exactly when he reached for the gun. I thought it was going to be the not smart hero moment, where it's pull the gun out, just blaze away, and then see, did I live? But what's he do?
After it's going.
Yeah, I don't have that many holes in me. I won. But he does. That is, even in just that short span of time, we see that he's made a rational adult decision. He just lets it go.
Yeah.
He just hands off the gun. We'll just see how things go.
And you're absolutely right. It's one of the things I like about this movie is that Harlock is not a traditional boys action hero. He's a much more thoughtful person, which provides a very nice contrast to what we're used to in movies like this. And it's also interesting comparing this to like the films we've been watching up to this point, which have been very much adventure movies. He is not Horace. He is not Lupin. He just is much more thoughtful, introverted person. In this very interesting world, because in the Harlock TV series, as far as I can recall, there is no mention whatsoever that Earth had been taken over by an alien race like 3 years before.
Yeah.
They just kind of invented it for the movie. But they're living in war, and they're living in the aftermath of war.
The occupied area, which I love the fact when he crashes the ship, they're not the Illuminati, but the whatever their name is, that they're like, oh, perhaps he wouldn't have had such a hard time if the landing pad hadn't been in terrible condition.
Right.
And you notice looking around, it's like, for an occupation force that's conquered Earth, their facilities are junk.
Yeah.
There's like bits and pieces of them broken off. There's like, kind of rubbish around. It's like, okay, we know there's an active resistance, but you guys don't even make the effort to make the conquering, army facilities in decent shape. They're just sort of junky and left to rot.
Which is brilliant foreshadowing, I think, for later in the movie where you realize, oh, they're not going to be here long.
Yeah.
Yeah. No point putting the place up if it's not going to be here in a few years.
Which is interesting that they never mentioned exactly what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean? In like other series, it's like, oh, somebody's going to show up to Earth because we have water, because we have air, because we have gold, because we have people, whatever.
Yeah.
They show up for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, this is an interesting movie of Harlock.
Yeah.
Not why are the aliens here? Not why did this happen? Not really generally any of the greater geopolitical aspects of the entirety of the universe. No, it's about Harlock.
Mm-hmm.
And developing Harlock as his character.
And it's very much kind of, the occupied's perspective, where, they come in, I don't know why you're here. I don't, that's not actually relevant to me, what your goals are. You just happen to be the boot stomping on my face. It's about what you do as a result of them attacking, more than, oh, they were here for water. Well, that changes. No, it doesn't change anything at all. It's very interesting. And I do really like that. Then he meets Totoro, his longtime companion.
His 1,000-year-old buddy.
Yeah, exactly. And so, FYI, for those curious, in the Harlock TV series, Totoro is the soul of the Arcadia.
Yes,
he is the Arcadia, in some very mystical way. And so one of the fun things about this is actually seeing them together, seeing that interaction between these people, where that's kind of one of the central tragedies of Harlock is my best friend is gone. This is all I have left of him.
Well, the accidental watching of that 30-minute movie, they actually cover the Arcadia doing stuff by itself.
Wow.
Like they're leaving Earth and the ship turns around and they're like, the helm's not nothing. What's going on?
Yeah.
And it lands and it's just like, oh, what? And he says, oh, that's his spirit. And you see the central core computer and it's got like a couple of light up screens. And then there's this band around the middle of it that's like, and this light comes up on the back and it's like, I got it. So that's the soul of the ship doing something. I guess. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
I'm following.
Exactly.
Confused at the time.
Yeah.
It was the wrong movie, but I was following. I got it.
Yeah. And this lovely Matsumoto mechanical design. I just love all of his gears and dials and gauges. But then we go back to the big, and I'll be honest, when I was watching this the first time, and we cut back again to World War II, I'm like, is this going to be a science fiction movie at all? Or is it just going to be, 80% World War II? But it turns out to be this very interesting interlude, partly because, as you mentioned, he's German. And Totoro's Japanese.
Part of a pirate knight family.
Right.
I'm not really aware of what that is, but
And in fairness, this is actually something I did look up. At one point, Phantom Harlock, Totoro asks him why he's fighting, and he says something like, "I'm paying off a debt." It was common for various noble families around the former Austro-Hungarian Empire and so forth to essentially say, "Hey, I'm going to send my son as a fighter pilot so that we don't have to be involved in the war." And so that our duchy can just be isolated. So the implication is he agreed to do this so that his family and their little, chunk of Europe don't have to be drawn into the conflict. Which I think might be there kind of to throw a bone to the viewer of going, is he a Nazi? No, not really. Okay, fine.
No.
He's just a German Japanese guy.
Yeah. Sure.
We'll agree to that.
Whatever makes everyone happy. Now I want to talk to you guys a little bit about this this rangefinder. This sort of focal lens.
The gun sight.
The gun sight. Yeah. Because it struck me as in some ways a very otaku thing of fetishizing this bit of technology. And really focusing on a kind of arcane element of fighter plane technology and how cool that is. But I never quite understood why it was such a central role in the film, other than obviously it sets things up. But like why they chose that. Did you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, he addresses the actual site as being like this critical thing to himself. So I took that to be where Toshiro, like, he gets the site, and obviously it carries down through history, but he builds that style of site into the Arcadia. So it's that sort of, okay, I know that Harlock's got this thing. He's got this, and a lot of pilots had, various superstitions. Put a picture of somebody in there that you love as protection, or carry a, St. John's medal or something like that. It's very superstitious people when you're fighting for your death. Fighting to not get killed, I should say. And his fetish was that gun sight. That gun sight never did him wrong. That gun sight was everything that he needed. It was the soul of his plane. So that, that's where the fetish comes in. That's why it gets, incorporated into the ship then that Harlock, the descendant, gets to fly. And then it makes it the original gun sight makes an appearance again. Wow.
Well, that's for me. That was the suspension of disbelief. I'm like, 1,000-year-old guns. Okay, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay,
we're just gonna hook it into the spaceship. Like, oh, that'll work good.
Yeah, perfect. Where did we keep this an entire time? Anyway,
if this thing's powered, did you check for voltage, like regularity? How's it doing this?
Right. It's his first 50-year, checkup and see if it's working. But I think for me, what it was that it was actually not so much as more to your point, John. I think not so much the technology of itself, as it is that it represented something that they both wanted, which was, why don't we use what we have to do something better than, as they said, this stupid war? Why don't we use this gun sight for something better? Because that's actually what Toshiro in World War II was working on from Japan. The reason why he was there was to build better equipment. And so they were and that's actually something that happened in World War II, was that the Japanese and the Germans were trading tech on a certain level, and knowledge and know-how. To a certain degree, not totally, but to a certain degree.
Well, to the limited number of U-boats that could make it across the entire globe to the other side.
Right, yeah. And so I think it wasn't so much that the site, like when Harlock gave up the site, to him it was his luck. This is what it is. And so he gives it to Toshiro, and he says, use this as a way to further our goal somehow. And so I think it became more simple. So when they brought it back out, towards the end, it goes, oh, the site's been damaged. I'm thinking, okay, yes, we've abandoned the concept of all physics in this anime at this point.
Steve? The fluttering flag in space was not a suspension of disbelief moment for you? There's wind in space, right?
And the whole back of Harlock's, the Arcadia, of just being like a galleon, Spanish galleon.
Literally.
Anyway, so so he goes, oh, here's this thing that I've been keeping for 1,000 years. This will work, and it does, because it's something that Toshiro has been making, that probably his family, as his ancestors, have been making since day one, since he was able to escape onto the onto the Switzerland side of that lake, or river.
Yeah. And I
like during the escape moment that Harlock keeps getting hit by French resistance on the. So I thought Harlock was in the German side. Why is French resistance on the other side of Switzerland in southern Germany? Don't know. Didn't ask that question at the time, at least. But he walks back towards the plane, and they're shooting at him. It's like, is the indication there that's how my ancestor died? Yours went off to Switzerland and watchmakers to create better technology, and my ancestor walked back towards the plane and got killed?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, that seemed kind of like what it was going to be.
Totally. And Steve, I love your insight about the symbolism of that little bit of tech, because I think that that is what the Arcadia becomes, very much so. It is this potent warship, but it's not there to fight a war. It's there to raise a flag for something very different. Which is interesting because a lot of the middle of the movie is very much about this question of what are we going to do? We are this conquered people. Harlock clearly wants to do something, but there's no real solution to what's going on. And I do love the fact that really the ultimately their next step is to help somebody else, and to sort of all come together as a group, with the arrival of Emeraldus, which is very interesting. Anyone who's not familiar with this character, giant space blimp appears out of nowhere, and
with a
pirate
boat
lady
glued on the bottom.
on the bottom.
Yeah.
And then this very regal looking Harlock woman shows up.
Yeah.
And you're like, what is going on? And I actually have the Emeraldus manga. It's amazing, because Emeraldus is a very unusual character in the Matsumoto-verse. But it's clearly one of those things. And when I rewatched it again, because it's been so long since I watched it, that ship came up, and I was like, "Oh, holy!"
The space blimp.
Yeah. But the first time, I was like, "Okay, I guess."
Interesting choice of vehicle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also like the fact that, and again, it's kind of interesting from the. Okay, so let's just put this out there. Matsumoto's stories from Yamato, which he was involved in, but not, he didn't invent every single bit. And all the other stuff tend to be very male focused. Tend to be very male characters, very few female characters around. When they're there, they're generally very much side characters, kind of doing their thing. Emeraldus is an exception, but I think it's also interesting in this movie, for being this origin story, it's not Emeraldus' origin story.
Right.
Right, yeah.
Harlock comes along, she's there, and she's guiding Harlock. She's very much the wiser, older figure. And I thought it was just kind of a neat way of introducing that character, and not just having her, I should be a pirate someday,
I'll escape Earth, and my first choice will be piracy.
Exactly, yes.
Well, my job opportunities are fairly limited.
Yeah, she has a whole origin story.
I'll go up to Tokarga.
There we are.
I'll go work there. Oh, that doesn't work out either.
No. So
that didn't pan out.
Yeah.
Did anybody else get creeped out when the old guy's like, "Hey, Maria is the last Tokarga girl. So now we can't ever have any children." And I'm thinking, dude, she was 5. And you're already 60. You're really freaking me out here with this.
Yeah.
That totally sideswiped me. I was just because it just comes out.
Yeah.
Just literally, it just comes out in a conversation where, and beforehand, there's this, when they're on the planet, and he goes, "I thought everyone was dead," and he sees all these guys, and they hug and everything, and you think everything's going to be okay, and you're going to find more people on this planet, and winds up to being this crushed little child underneath the rubble.
Yeah.
And you pull
one
out,
little girl and 4 dudes.
4 dudes, right?
The whole planet.
And you're just that, and of course, that's when you discover what's going to happen to Earth is pretty much this.
Yeah.
And so, but they, so they're on the ship, and the little girl dies, and it's just, and again, I'm just gonna say it, a pathetic, sad little death, and it's, it is what it is. And then they're standing in the hallway, and this was a clip that I had seen before. I remember seeing, because I was much younger and I didn't quite understand what I was watching. And he says to the other guys, he goes, "Remember, Harlock tried to help us out, and everyone's going to be doomed if we don't help him out. And well, we got nothing else to live for, because the little 5-year-old child that we're thinking about in a weird, creepy way of repopulating our species with is dead, and so we're going to help Harlock out." And at first you're going, "Oh, that's so sad, it's the last one." So they're going to do their best to, further the cause for Earth, and then you realize, they're like,
yeah,
ship makes it through the whole 9 yards, and you're just like going, okay, and they're like going looking for them, and then they open the door, and you just see the guy's helmet and his little tippy
Yeah.
little, and you just
And I love
you're
the
just-
physics.
and the door is open.
Physics of
Yeah.
and it's just like you guys are standing there looking
And
at
not
the
just,
sun.
and not just,
it's
and not
like
just space, but burning space. But
Yeah,
burning
I know.
space,
That's-
right?
It's like super heated, and you're just like, wow, look, the airlock's open. Like, as opposed to being incinerated instantly, or explosive decompression. Like you open up the inner doors and sucks you all out, which we know does happen. Because in the fight with Zeta,
That's right. It does. Yeah.
they hit.
Yeah.
The Arcadia hits his ship at
From-
one point, pops the hull, and you see people sucked out. So that made me think back to
So-
the burning sun thing, and I'm like, wow, what went wrong here?
So yeah, in fairness, I believe it has been established in universe that they have force fields essentially over like these.
They never
these
said
sections.
anything
They
to
do
us.
not. Yes, that is very true. But yeah, no, I you're right, and I think it's interesting also because that speech seems shocking in the moment and out of place, and then everything after that feels weird because suddenly they're escaping. Everything's fine. Like, why were they able to get out of here? This doesn't make any sense. Did they just write that in? And then you go back and I kind of think that they were deliberately sort of surprising you with that dialogue to sort of pull your attention to that moment. To say, we're going to introduce this uncomfortable element of the whole storyline, because that would be kind of, a thing that not only for the audience but also for him to bring to his crew to say, hey, look, this just happened. Like, this is the situation we're in. Pay attention. This is what we got to do right now. Because I'll be honest. I mean, there was certainly nothing in the behavior of any of the people that suggested that they were thinking along those lines, right?
Yeah.
So
Did anybody do any research into hey, if you remember the film from what is the 80s or 90s, Earth Girls Are Easy?
Oh right, yeah.
Are you hooked up on this whole thing where she's got to be Togargan and that's it?
Yeah.
Can you just have marry somebody else and just have more kids? And
Right.
Because
I got to be honest, I would be the jerk in the group that goes, open the airlock, but I'm not gonna with you guys.
I really like Emeraldus, and I'm gonna go over with her
Yeah.
because she seems like a really cool lady. So thanks.
Yeah.
Y'all enjoy that third-degree instant burn. See ya.
But and also, you guys have seen what you guys have seen of Galaxy Express. Like, this is all over Galaxy Express of just doomed cultures and people dealing with the fact that we can't possibly continue from where we are, and what you do as a result of that. So it does again kind of feel a little out of place. But I think they were kind of trying to not shoehorn in, but introduce something a little heavier, because this movie isn't heavy at all.
No.
There's a moment of levity, actually.
Yeah, pretty much. And then Harlock comes back, and we have this whole thing where he's standing off with the people there, and I don't know. On the one hand, I understand where they were going with this, because, how do they not all just mow down everyone in the Arcadia immediately? And I do appreciate the fact that they do set up the fact that, I forget the name of him, but the big general leader guy, Zal. Is it
Zeta?
Zeta, thank you.
Well, Zal was the Tokargan.
Right.
Tokargan guy. Zal Onichan
Yeah. Oh yeah, thank you.
Oh boy, nothing like finding two dead kids and a big talking bird.
Yay.
That was a fun moment.
Oh,
A crying talking bird.
Yes.
So just not repeating things. It's emotionally attached.
Mhm.
Creepier even.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going ahead.
But yeah.
And by the way, that's the thing I would have left on the planet.
The bird.
I would have taken the bird and not taken it and have it on my shoulder.
It almost looked like it didn't really have a choice. Like it just liked Harlock. It was just attached to him. Like,
yeah, pretty much.
By the way, it's a parasite.
Yeah.
I will say the aliens did have, even though it's really weird for Zeta to talk about, we're going to have a samurai showdown.
Mm-hmm.
Where in the hell are you coming up with the history of Earth? But that's fine. You've been occupied collecting data. That's like more than 3,000 or 4,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. Whatever.
Yeah.
But they are very good on their military protocol. They let
True.
Harlock crash the ship, and they don't immediately shoot him.
Mm-hmm.
They let him come back with the Arcadia, and they don't immediately shoot him.
Mm-hmm.
But there seems to be a fair amount of protocol involved before the gunfights start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There it is. There we go. I had to find it. No, totally, and I do appreciate the fact that they established the fact that that Zeta respects Harlock from the beginning. And he understands where Harlock's coming from, and so is willing to kind of give him that rope.
Satisfaction.
Yeah.
Yeah. To say,
Well,
okay,
he lets him wander around Earth again.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like when he gets back, it's like Zol, is supposed to, keep an eye on him, but Harlock just kind of wanders off to find Maya.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of wandering around. It's like, yeah, they're following him. That obviously,
Sure. Yeah.
Harlock probably really should have thought about that beforehand. Be like,
Right.
they're following you. You realize that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that was still very generous of Zeta to let Harlock just walk around.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
Okay.
And and then that gets into one of the things I love about a lot of these movies is there's often a lot going on, behind the scenes. Is that I'm sure if somebody questioned Zeta, he'd say, "Well, of course I'm going to let him walk around because he's going to lead us directly to the Resistance."
To Maya.
Right. Why would I shoot a useful resource?
Well, he alludes to some of that later, where he's like, we don't want to do anything that's going to cause more unrest.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure that we have things under control, that we quash the uprising and don't give it fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like he says that later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's no fool. And then we get the big climactic space fight between Harlock and the rest, and this is always difficult in Harlock in general. In the TV series, they usually resorted to the space fighters because Harlock's universe is built on the idea of galleons and broadsides. So that is what you get in this space battle, and it's just, okay, how much of your ship can we tear down before our ship gets torn down enough?
Yeah.
And it's big and it's thrilling and it's exciting, but it's very different from a traditional, anime space battle, definitely.
Right, yeah.
Well, I mean, just the taking off of the Arcadia. It's just like, you're driving upward. You're talking about, it's the ramp at angle is set. And I was thinking it was going to take off and it was going to be like some kind of side of a mountain or something. It was going to come flying out of the cave or something. No, it goes up through like a full-on 500 feet of earth and reinforced concrete steel, and without a scratch. It doesn't pull off the radar antenna equipment. It doesn't pull off anything off the ship. I'm like, wow, what did you build this out of?
And again, in fairness,
I want to share to be my mechanic.
Yeah. And again, in fairness, the big plot point of episode 1 of Captain Harlock is the fact that he's going up against some dangerous thing and he just rams it, and it's revealed that the Arcadia's front is indestructible, and he can just kind of like ram through ship after ship after ship after ship and just destroy them, and he'll be fine. So I think it was kind of like, oh yeah, the Arcadia can do that. It's just a superpower it has. Don't think about it.
Even then, the front of the Arcadia is just so big. The entire deck superstructure and the bridge. So yeah, you can ram into it. It's just going to sweep the hull entirely clear. You're like, oh, okay.
Cherry is a very strong wood.
Yeah, sure. Apparently it hardens up with all that space breeze
Exactly,
that blows
yeah.
out there with the flags fluttering.
Yeah, totally. Flag of the moon, man.
Stop asking questions. Damn it. Sorry, my bad.
It is but that actually gets to an interesting thing. I think a lot of modern fans can't get into movies like this, can't get into this era because of stuff like that, where it's just like, we're going to do this because it's cool. We're going to have a flying Jolly Roger in space because who doesn't want that, you know?
Yeah.
Because honestly, the Arcadia does look cool.
Oh hell yeah!
Yeah.
Like when I was watching it, I was like, I'd like to have that actually.
Yeah.
I'd like that to be my.
I'd like to have that next to my Yamato.
Yeah.
Have them both side by side.
Absolutely.
And again, and I've said this, last week. Did you notice with Maya and Emeraldus that when the moment that they're captured, did you notice the Judeo-Christian thing again?
Yeah.
They don't just line him up against the wall. They freaking crucify him. I'm like, oh boy.
Yep.
It's just such interesting.
It is absolutely
prop pieces that provides to so many different animes. It's very interesting.
Oh, totally. It is very odd. I'm trying to find that in the clip because it is kind of, very much a thing.
Yeah, I mean it's not subtle.
No.
It kind of smacks you around with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
just slightly.
I mean it's almost I'm gonna say it's a little fan servicey,
Well, that's definitely true.
Yep.
Which is interesting because Maya isn't. Maya's like dirty and like kind of like looks a little roughed up, but it's like nope. Emeraldus, she's like,
oh yeah,
torn uniform.
Yeah, which leads me to believe there was a scene they cut.
That easily could be.
Because it's unlikely they would have animated that without where that was coming from.
And doesn't the second in command jerk guy, doesn't he backhand her at one point?
Oh yeah, very much.
And
so.
it's like, I would think there would be somewhere in there. Yeah, what you're saying is like there's probably a sequence in there that wasn't in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess Emeraldus is a wanted space pirate, right? Like the idea of enhanced interrogation techniques would not be surprising. Yeah. And it would be, not to suggest that I would want to see a scene like this. But it would also be, from a storytelling perspective, a way of showing Emeraldus's stoicism in the face of, physical confrontation and so forth. So,
right.
But I think this movie's already over 2 hours. I think they're like, they understand. We don't have to go there.
Or you know what it could have been? Or you know what it could have been? The reason why that they were both so roughed up is because they were laughing at the facial hair of the aliens.
That is they're very fair.
All the way.
Come on.
All the way underneath right.
Yeah, Zeta has got like this crazy thing going on there. I'm like, wow.
Yeah,
facial hair does not instantly make you super alien-y, but his really did.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of mutton chops in space, turns out.
Oh, yeah.
That is a very popular thing. But yeah, it's always fun going back and seeing, every era's perspective of what the future's going to look like. It's like, everything comes back again, obviously. But if that's what our future looks like, I'd be very surprised.
Well, I'm still. What in the heck is Harlock's sword? Is it a gun or is it a sword?
Yes, it is.
He has a handgun.
Yes. No, it's both of those things.
Does he fight?
Yeah.
I mean, but does he fight with it? Because it's a long barrel. He fires with it. But
he also sword fights with it. Yeah, it is a sword gun. Yeah.
So how does he? Traditionally with a sword, you slash somebody or you stab them. if you've got a gun barrel, it's kind of blunt at the end, and it's a barrel. So do you just bludgeon them to death?
So
Haha, parry, whack on the head. Ow, damn it.
So that is part of it. I suspect that this actually goes back to a real thing in Golden Age science fiction. You do not want to fire weaponry inside a spaceship. Ballistics and lasers inside a spaceship is very bad. So you go back to hand weapons. Back in the old Lensman novellas back in the 1930s, which is one of the first science fiction space opera things. Like, they talk about that at length. And so folks have, like, axes and swords on board ship, so that when they get boarded, like, they do hand-to-hand fighting, because no one dares fire off a pistol and break sensitive equipment. So I suspect the implication is when people board, there's hand-to-hand fighting. So he has he is able to parry and able to sort of engage in melee combat if he has to, but then also has the barrel of the
shoot
gun.
with his pistol
Right.
if he has to. I say fireball crystal in an enclosed
There
cabin
we
space.
go. Yeah.
It's decks 1 through 5 gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, my bad.
Well, and we know later on that Harlock is very willing to engage in whatever tactics are necessary to do what needs to get done.
Yes.
So that kind of stuff would not surprise me at all. But yeah, so we get the big climax of the ending, where we discover something kind of interesting about our villain. We discover he's a samurai. They use the word samurai, I'm sure, in context in Japanese. They're using it in the way we would use knight, to say,
Right.
not literally like Sir Alec whatever,
Right.
but and in fact, Space Runaway Ideon, like, all of the aliens call themselves samurai. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, who settled you? Anyway, but
It's a good shortcut word, I guess,
Yeah.
to get your point across without being unnecessarily wordy.
totally. And so he actually kind of sacrifices himself for Harlock's sake.
Yeah.
Which brings up some interesting questions about sort of what he thinks at the end. Like, is this sort of a sort of surrender, in a sense, where he realizes we did the wrong thing, and the most noble thing for me to do is to sacrifice myself for this other person's benefit, because I don't want to support my side anymore.
Well, we also don't know. We saw Zal, who was a conquered planet, the Tokargans, and working for these guys.
Yeah.
We don't know that Zeta is necessarily pure Illuminati. I'll just call it Illuminati for the hell of it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He may be from a different conquered
That's true.
group that has risen through the ranks to be, and arguably, if you want to, again, this is some of the geopolitical that we don't know. He is the occupation governor of a small, mostly harmless T-shirt producing planet on the spiral outer edge of the Milky Way galaxy.
Yep.
So, you know what I mean? He might not be like the super cred, pure blood guy who's going to have control of star systems. He's maybe a dude for his planet got conquered. He's risen through the ranks, being a good, loyal guy, and they say, well, here's a nice little governorship. You can just go off this little plane over here.
Yeah.
So we don't know that might not have been so much a sacrifice as in, you know what, I've watched other people stand up for their people, and damn it, I'm going to do the same and give a chance for the Earthlings to stand up for themselves. We don't know. None of that's terribly clear.
That's a great point.
Because it's odd. He certainly has an entire battle fleet on its way. You know what I mean? All he has to do is buy time.
Yeah.
An entire battle fleet against a indestructible galleon and a blimp.
I would lay money on the battle fleet. As much as I like the
Pretty
blimp and
much.
the giant floating skull, but we did see that Zeta ship in its broadside, which is, again, interesting the way you're keeping that broadsiding concept going when you've got turrets
Yeah.
and stuff on the Arcadia, and it's like you're
And if you're broadsiding, why did you need the sight?
Yeah.
Whatever, but that's fine. But
Okay, space wind.
yeah, space wind, exactly. You have to account for space wind in your firing. But he's got more than enough technology to damage the Arcadia. Zeta has the capability. The Arcadia's on fire. There are bits and pieces of it that are burning, and there's things going on. So, that space fleet coming, the Arcadia is not wholly indestructible in that respect. So, if he had just played his cards a little better and delayed and sort of flown around a little bit more, that fleet would have shown up and destroyed everybody.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well, and it's very clear because we find out that the way he exploded was specifically to help out.
Cause a ripple in space or some other
magnetic
advanced thing
thing.
that causes lasers to like what?
Yeah, that I will admit feels very much like a writer pulling something out of their rear end.
How
do we get out of this situation? Oh, sure, the explosion created a bend in space time. Sure.
Sure.
That just happens to float along with the Arcadia stuck to it, apparently. Yeah.
I think it could be as simple as the fact that one of the things that you learn early on in a movie through talking with Zoll is that because Zoll was actually a former actual combatant of Harlock's in the previous battle, and they talked about how well the other one fought, kind of a pleasantry exchange. And that I think kind of appealed to Zeta the entire time. I think Zeta wanted that fight the whole movie.
Oh yeah, totally.
And then at the end of it, he got his fight. And I think what happened was that Zeta lost. Harlock realized that he was outmaneuvered, outdone. Harlock is the better fighter, and he acknowledges this.
Yeah.
And in keeping with maybe some type of dual honor, dual as in DUEL.
Oh yeah.
Basically said, you bested me, so I owe you your prize. And your prize is that I'm going to make sure you get out of here.
Yeah. I
So
like that.
before the fleet comes, and then you're going to do whatever it is you're going to do. Thank you for the it's kind of the thank you for the honor of fighting, and then does what he does, and has the space-time continuum, and everyone uses the space wind to go through the Jeffries tube to get home.
Yeah. And then the doctor shows up.
With the laughing
doctor
face.
shows up.
Yes. Well, is there any element of Bushido in there where since he's lost, he can't surrender anyway, so he has to honorably die?
I think there's a
meh.
There's a flavor of that in there, definitely.
Yeah, that's sad.
And then just to underscore how fun this movie is, when all that is done and the villain sacrifices himself so the good guy can get away, we end with the funeral of all these people. The very sort of Wrath of Khan funeral.
Wrath of Khan.
All the things going out, which I just realized. Wait a minute. When did that movie come out?
That the Wrath of Khan stole it from them?
Wrath of Khan did come out in
82. Okay, yeah. So, yeah. So no, I don't think they stole it from each other. I was just wondering. But it's and it's also interesting that he buries not only Maya, but also the remnants of a whole other world that he has nothing to do with. But it kind of gives them that final burial.
Which, by the way, he dug Zoll up.
Yeah.
So when they go to see the grave, it's like you dug him up to just then shoot him in space. Why not just bury
Yeah.
the little girl next to him?
Well, and here's the thing, and I suspect it. Bury him where?
Earth, his last station post.
That's not. Yeah, see, that's the thing. Is that they have
Oh,
they
come
can't
on.
be buried on another world. They should be buried on their
They should
own
be
world
buried
or
in
in
the
space.
sea of stars.
The sea of stars, exactly. Yes. So
Where the Genesis bomb
Yeah,
brings him back to
right.
life. Wait a minute.
Love that image. And yeah, and then we end on Harlock being the grim space pirate that he is in the rest of the storyline. So yeah, it's one of those movies where you think, oh, okay, space pirate, space opera adventure movie. This will be fun. And there's a lot more layers to this than I thought when I first went into it. It's a really serious film.
Well, did you ever see, and this is going to sound terrible, did you ever see Bodacious Space Pirates?
I've seen pieces of it, yeah. First few episodes.
As an entire series, the name is probably the dumbest element of it.
I've heard that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because it then goes on to address like some very interesting like coming of age kind of things. So as we see Harlock maturing in his responsibilities and dealing, with a lot of firsthand horror,
Yeah.
losing Maya after he made so many attempts to get to her.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think there's a lot more going on with the sort of jolly space pirate buccaneer kind of thing than is necessarily just funny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like even 30 years later, I think Bodacious Space Pirates was like, gosh, it has to have been almost 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little less.
Yeah.
So it's like, in that span of time, you still get this concept that it's like, well, you can actually do a little bit more with space piracy than just being a chucklehead. You could actually address some things going on.
Right.
And the pirate part is almost just a stage setting.
Yeah.
It's incidental to what's going on.
Yeah.
Because I never once saw him board anybody's boat and steal anything.
No.
If anything, he kind of seems to be not Gesundheit. He almost seems to be more mercenary, even though nobody's paying him that I'm aware of. Gesundheit twice.
Thank you.
One more time.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It's like he seems like soldier of fortune more so than just like a pirate kind of guy.
Yeah.
When he goes through that whole speech of like, we're not going to accept help, we're not going to give help, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, we're just going to be this force in the universe, whatever that force is.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of an interesting little speech. And then I'm just kind of like, so you're basically just going to fly around and just muck things up? We're going with this?
Pretty much interrupt the empire with your flying around.
Well, and that's the thing.
I mean, we've gone through. We've gone through so much death. We've seen the creepy end of an entire civilization. Our own planet is heading in that direction, and all these people around you are, through your own actions and decisions, are dying. So what's your payoff? Because for me, the one thing about this whole movie that doesn't do it for me is that there's no. It's an origin story. You're right, and I think that's really just the whole point of this movie. Is it's an origin story, but there doesn't feel to be that payoff of this is what it has made me into, and this is what I'm going to be, and this is where I'm going. You don't really get any of that. What you get is a very bitter person who is capable of great violence and not really caring who he hurts in the process. So what does that make him? What is it in the end? What does he become? And you don't really get that. And that was a frustrating point for me for this whole movie, was that we go through this whole 2 hours of just never ending. Hi, aren't I cute? I'm dead. Hi, I love your life. I'm dead. Hi, I'm this cute person. I'm dead. Hi, there's an entire civilization that you failed to protect. They're dead. So where does this go for you? Where does
I mean, it's something I actually kind of liked about the film is that it didn't tie everything up with a neat bow at the end, and it keeps Harlock as this questionable in this questionable state because he is a violent man. he is a, somebody that you don't necessarily want to get involved with. There's a scene in the CGI movie back in 2012, 2013, where a bunch of guys see the Arcadia come to their world, and they all, ooh, I want to join, and they all, get up there, and then they're paraded around, and the crew says, why do you want to join the Arcadia? And whoever answers incorrectly is shoved off the ship that is like floating a mile above the thing to their death because they answered wrong. Because we're pirates.
In all fairness, the Arcadia we know from the movie can be piloted by 4 people, which essentially is really only Totoro. Only him.
Yep.
Harlock is sort of nominally doing stuff, but not a lot.
Yeah.
Everybody that they invited to go with them is a completely untrained person.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, in the latter stages of the broadsides and stuff, you see everybody populating the entire bridge, running things and pushing buttons, and things are going on. I'm thinking, these people were just, like, hanging out in a hole, like, acting food credits. They're not licensed, qualified spaceship people. What is going on with it?
Because the reality would have been, Harlock would have been, hard side to port, fire the cannon, and you would have had that 4 people going,
What is that?
What
the hell is port?
Yeah.
Do you see how many buttons do we have here? Which one?
I was a telephone technician.
Buttons.
I only know how to answer them. I don't know what button you want me to push with this thing.
It's all buttons. It's buttons all the way down.
Can any of you fly a spaceship? I drove a taxi. I mean,
and in fairness, I think, and again, I think the implication is that we are so many thousands of years in the future that piloting a spaceship is like, using oars on a, on a raft. Like, everyone has some idea of how all these things work, because it's kind of become genetic memory at this point. But you're absolutely right that it is kind of, kind of oddball.
Yeah. I mean, just the, you could probably know, like, what a communication set. So, like, they would have something presumably like a cell phone or something that far in the future. But you're not going to know how to set frequencies and dial into stuff on a major ship communications board. You know what I mean? Like,
But also, this is complaining that lightsabers make no sense. As
they
technology.
make total sense. They make total sense. As long as the light beam is like several light years long, and it peters out as it filters into space. But it totally makes sense. But that was a very obvious moment in that. So the idea of taking people a mile up, and be like, "Why do you want to join the crew?" Is a real answer? Well, because I don't know anything more than you do. You showed up on the boat too, so I might as well do anything. What skills do you have? Well, crap, you're listing for people to join. I might as well be a doctor. Just put me in charge.
Anyway, so that is Arcadia, my youth. Did you guys have any other thoughts or, anything else?
I think that if you were to get into this universe, I would almost say hit the series first.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And do this second. I would definitely say hit the series first and do this second, because it does fill in a lot of holes. And if you do enjoy this universe, like Galaxy 999, it's a really good gateway to get into all that, because even though we're joking around about the physics in space and stuff with this movie, Galaxy 999 is just going to blow your mind anyway. But it gives you an idea of what this is, and it gives you, and it's nice to see something encapsulated like that, like a universe encapsulated with these 3 or 4 series, and having one movie that kind of ties it in. But I would definitely say see the series first, get into the groove of that, and fall in love with the idea of that, and then watch the movie. Yeah. And then because if you're watching Captain Harlock, if you heard about Captain Harlock and this universe, and then you watch this movie and you're going, why am I watching a World War I era biplane trying to go over a mountain? It's just not going to work for you.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work.
Yeah, it's probably not the best starting point for the Harlock movie. You gotta-
And the animation is, it's definitely closer to movie quality, but it's not, light years beyond the TV show.
Right.
So if you can watch the movie, you can definitely watch the TV series. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. John, any final thoughts?
I mean, for the bits and pieces that I've seen of Harlock, that this is not a good place to start if you're going in cold. It gave certainly a lot more background to the Harlock now that I've seen parts of, and it was a decent film.
Yeah.
Honestly, it would certainly, if it would have been 1982, I would still probably have done what I've talked to you guys about with the new anime premieres. It would have been one of those. I think I would have waited for people to see it, and then asked them, be like, "Does it really flesh anything out? Was it genuinely entertaining to you, or is this just so niche kind of thing into Harlock that it's just meh?" You'll wait for it to come around on VHS.
Yeah. Totally agreed. Totally agree with Agent fans. I think it's, you got to figure out what's well, you don't have to figure it out, but it is helpful to figure out what's a good starting point for pretty much any universe. And the TV series is a good place to start. The other nice thing about the TV series is that there is a plot, but it's fairly episodic in terms of structure. So you can get a good amount of story out of it and then say, okay, I'm curious where this is going, but I don't need to come back, and find out what's going on with these weird burning alien women who scream when they die. It's very odd. But yeah. The Mazone.
Is that not in the first 7 episodes?
It's fairly early on. It's not the first episode, but it's a few episodes in. An alien ship crash lands on Earth, and these warrior women come out, and when you shoot them, they burst into flame and scream.
Wow, I don't remember that. I'm going to have to go back again. Wow.
Yeah, it's really odd.
That's
Yeah, it's I mean, when I say it's really odd, I mean it is intended to be very unsettling. Like it is meant to be what
the
is going
description
on.
of it works too.
Yeah.
Yes, they did a great job. So.
Yeah. Like paper.
No flesh wounds for you.
No.
Nick, you go up in flame.
Yeah.
Like, oh, wow.
Well, and it gets back to this whole interesting thing about the Leishiverse and how he builds things. Is that like, you have this entire female culture, warrior culture, it seems, and so you have to shoot a woman, which first off, makes some of the characters in the show uncomfortable. But then when you shoot them, they scream like a banshee and just burn in flames, and it's like, like I don't want to do this anymore. Well, do you want to defend Earth?
Good about that.
Yeah. So
I have a war crimey feel about this.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure
Yeah. So yeah, and the Harlock universe, and I think we'll stop here. Is the idea that the Leishiverse is vast. There's a lot of Harlock and Galaxy Express and all this other stuff, and so there's a lot of different things a lot of different ways of getting in. I think Harlock is actually one of the easier ways to get into the Leishiverse, because it is space opera, piracy and so forth. And so I would advise folks to not feel intimidated at the idea of this massive thing. It's just all little bits and pieces all over the place, and wherever you get in is fine. You're not going to miss some important thing because you didn't get this came out first, but that came out afterwards, and I just watch something. But definitely TV show first. Cool. Thank you all for being involved in that. That was a lot of fun. We are going to take a quick break and then come back in about 5 minutes at 9:20 p.m. Eastern Time to talk about what's been going on with us in the anime world and do the news. So we will see you all in about 5 minutes. See you then.